listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 66. In this episode of the podcast, I will be interviewing Thomas Greanias, who is a New York Times bestselling author of the Atlantis trilogy. His books in that series consist of Raising Atlantis, The Atlantis Prophecy, and The Atlantis Revelation. And his iconic characters, archaeologist Conrad Yates and linguist Serena Sergeti, star in an augmented reality game, Ingress, which has been downloaded by more than 50 million players. Thomas studied creative writing and lives in Southern California with his family. And we're going to be talking to him about writing his thrillers and the video game component of his work, which is fascinating, and a whole bunch more. So stay tuned for my interview with Thomas Greanias. This episode, I'm talking with best-selling author Thomas Greanias, who's joining me here on Skype. How are you, Thomas?
I'm doing great. How are you, Alan?
Oh, I'm doing really good. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yep, my pleasure.
And so for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
My background was actually journalism at Northwestern University, actually. Was in the creative writing program, the same one that G.R. Martin went through some years earlier, and then later Veronica Roth. But I was also in the journalism school, and my focus was national security. And those themes just really clicked with me, and that's what I specialized in. And when I graduated, I was an on-air correspondent for NBC affiliates in Washington, D.C. And while I was there, I had some friends, in D.C., it's like the interns and the staffers who are in their early 20s pretty much run the town. But somehow I was able to get into the tunnels underneath the U.S. Capitol, some of which have been there from before the Republic. And it really sparked my imagination and later inspired some of my books. And so that's kind of where the conspiracy thriller aspect of things came to me, along with, in my childhood, I'd visit my mother's homeland of Greece, and I'd go on archaeological digs on Crete and Santorini and some of the islands. And so the whole mythology of Atlantis was with me as well. And eventually I moved out to Hollywood, where I was writing screenplays. I was doing some stuff with Jim Cameron and Ridley Scott, and my agent had called about adapting a book about ruins. And I thought that was interesting, and I was in a doctor's office and picked up National Geographic. This is about when I got the call, and it was about some research in Antarctica. Long story short, I kind of put it together, ruins in Antarctica. I thought that'd be kind of cool to write a big adventure about ancient ruins 2 miles beneath the ice in Antarctica. So that's how I came up with Raising Atlantis. And the irony is that when I finally got the book it was Warner Brothers that wanted me to adapt it, it wasn't about ruins, it was about runes, R-U-N-E-S, those medieval symbols. And I said, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do Raising Atlantis.
So that was a good misunderstanding. It worked out well.
Yes.
And so that was your first novel, was the Raising Atlantis?
Yes.
Some first novel, some debut.
Well, what the interesting thing about that one was, went out through one of the big bicoastal agencies, the head of the New York office, and didn't sell. And I then, this was originally, so I then ended up creating a website called the Atlantis Mapping Project that became very successful, like 2 million visitors a month, unique ones, and some of the most forwarded emails in America, according to an outfit called Clickability at the time, which measured those things. So these, bogus stories about the secret U.S. military dig in Antarctica were being read as much as, those How to Lose 10 Pounds in 10 Days articles from People and stuff from CBSNews.com. And so when I self-published it with Amazon, and this was before Kindle, and they really got behind it. It debuted at number 1, and then a full year later, it was number 2, just behind the Da Vinci Code and ahead of Dan Brown's other 3 books. And that's when I found another agent and said, hey, I think this is doing pretty well. And, within a month or so, there was an auction and different bidders, and then the book sold. And quite honestly, it wasn't that much different than the one that went out through one of the biggest agents in town and just didn't get any bites from publishers. But the traction, obviously, online changed all that. So that really taught me that sometimes you really do have to go past the gatekeepers to get something out there so it can find its audience.
Yes, and that's pretty amazing. You say you did all that before, even the whole Kindle thing took off. Huh? That's pretty good insight for that time.
At the time I didn't think that much of it. I thought that the web stuff was kind of its own thing, and actually had a whole subscription service and all kinds of things for the stories there. And the biggest problem that I had was that people thought that this fictional site was real, and we kept putting in more disclaimers, and the more disclaimers we put in, the more people started accusing us of a disinformation campaign on behalf of the Pentagon to distract attention from the real dig going on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy, and we even put out a back then Monster.com. This is the pre-LinkedIn days, was the big job site thing, and we put out a mock job posting to join the Atlantis mapping project in Antarctica, and it was posted by General Griffin Yates, the father of my hero, astroarchaeologist Conrad Yates, and it said all these crazy things about enduring, extreme temperatures, the various different things going on. And I was shocked. We got hundreds of resumes, and these resumes came from, I got three heads of home entertainment divisions at the Hollywood studios who applied for a job. I mean, they got that it was fiction and they thought this is cool. And then we got others who went totally off the spectrum. It's like, General Yates, I think you worked with my father years ago at the Pentagon. And, I've got small weapons background and I can do this job. It was a lot of fun, but it was crazy. We actually pulled the posting, even though Monster.com kept pushing us to push the posting even more. And we kept explaining this is not real.
They were loving the traffic.
Yeah. And in fact, the problem with Raising Atlantis with Ridley Scott at the time was that he wanted to do the historical version and show the continent and everything blowing up and sinking. And I kept trying to explain that, it's really a myth. It was in Plato's dialogues and an idealistic society. And so my book's about these ruins, millennia later, discovered under the ice, because Antarctica, if you take Plato's description literally, Antarctica is the best bet for the location of Atlantis. And, but I found that very interesting. Well, no, we want to do the historical account.
And that's something, there really are people out there that believe that there really was an Atlantis and it's out there somewhere, right? Still.
Yes, and I think that there were probably several candidates that inspired the story. Again, because of my own background and heritage, I'm pretty convinced it was the Minoan civilization in the Mediterranean around the island of Crete and the volcanic explosion there on Santorini that inspired the story for Plato hundreds of years later.
Is it the first thriller?
Yes.
And it was interesting. I was reading on your website about one of your characters, the linguist Serena. Is that Sergetti?
Yes, Serena Sergetti, Vatican linguist. Yes.
Yeah, okay. And it says that she's a star in an augmented reality game with over 15 million players. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think, did you say 15 or 50? It's 50 at least.
Yeah, 50 million.
Yeah, so both Conrad and Serena are part of this game Ingress by the company that brought us all Pokemon Go. And several years ago, a good friend of mine, who's the lead creative there for Niantic, a legendary video game designer, invited me to the original meeting, kind of like the formation of the CIA, the original meeting at the pool at the Beverly Hilton outside of the Trader Vic's bar, and that's where the general idea was hatched out a couple of years before the game ever came out. And so it was Google's first augmented reality game, and simply what that means is it was a geolocation-aware game that, again, if you've seen Pokemon, you know that it's where you use your mobile phones, and depending on where you are, there are certain portals that you would try to hack. And the general idea is that there's this mysterious force out there, the Shapers, who are trying to influence humanity, and that has split humanity's reaction to this idea of Shapers into two factions: the enlightened, who want to embrace this sort of alien, and again, enlightened knowledge, and then the resistance, which are resistant, who we don't know what this influence is, and we don't want to surrender to it until we know more. So Conrad and Serena, because of their adventures with Raising Atlantis and some of the themes there, and later on their battles with a centuries-old organization known as the Alignment, which, like the Shapers, has been trying to influence history, were just kind of naturals with it. So we did a cross-licensing deal, and I helped to define a couple of new characters for Google that are in the game that they had created, and published their a line of fiction that would also be incorporated into the game. And so Conrad and Serena were in there, along with some other characters from the Ingress game who were new. And the game, obviously, it took off. It was really a testing ground for this technology. And Niantic has since used the Pokemon Go brand to get downloaded, I think, 1.5 billion players, which is crazy. And there's a Harry Potter one coming out as well, and there's going to be another one I can't say anything about that'll also, another well-known property that'll be a big deal. But also later this summer, Ingress 2, the original one where Conrad and Serena were in, is going to be coming out, and I think they're pretty confident that, I mean, you know, if 50 million after, I mean, that was 5 years ago, I think the game first came out. I think after Pokemon Go's billion or so and Harry Potter, I think they're pretty confident they're going to get, you know what, I'm not going to speak for anyone. I'm pretty confident they'll get about 500 million players for it. So it created a whole new audience, a lot of it millennial, for Conrad and Serena. And so a lot of folks have picked up on their adventures. And we released 3 free ebooks, e-shorts, that all debuted at number 1 on Young Adult on Amazon, called The Virgin Mysteries. So there's they're all free. Anyone, for example, can go to raisingatlantis.com, and, you know, there are a couple of interlocking things you got to do to unlock them, but there's The Virgin City, which is a young adult version that introduces Conrad and Serena. There's The Virgin Sky, about the secret star alignments of Washington, D.C. that informed the best-selling sequel to Raising Atlantis called The Atlantis Prophecy, which did even better. And then there's The Virgin Sea, which are some notes and essays from Serena Sergetti, including her translation of the Confession of Moby Dick. So she's a linguist, so she can not only read or translate alien languages, she can, I guess, talk to the animals.
And now these books, with all of the architecture, the linguists, How much research do you have to put into goes into one of these novels?
Well, way too much. You'd be shocked at how much I have to cut out. And for example, the Atlantis Prophecy, which every single Masonic conspiracy and everything else you can imagine was in there. And there are like 6 different novels in there in terms of the research and storylines and the zodiacs embedded into the architecture of DC and whatnot. So it's a lot of fun. It's probably too much fun doing the research. To get it down into a story and simplify it was a real struggle. Same thing happened with the Roman, I have an ancient Roman thriller called The Chiron Confession, which is very much like a Robert Ludlum meets Gladiator sort of thing in first century Rome. And that was just a lot of fun. And the fact is all of it was for the most part true. It's based on historical facts and events and people. And I was just stunned to know that the emperor at the time, Emperor Domitian, that when he was born, his birth chart predicted the exact date and hour that he would die. As a result, he spent the rest of his life killing anybody he thought would try to fulfill that prophecy, which in the end came true, thanks to my hero in that book. but it was, and the fun thing is when research and things into other periods of time or things kind of reflect things today, and they seem kind of prophetic, but I think that's because things kind of just repeat themselves. So there was no political agenda in writing the Chiron Confession. It was just a number of reviewers noted that the Emperor Domitian there, he had some issues with his hair, like our current president, and he was really big into the reality of the arena, and the games there that he staged, again, like the current situation, and that mostly the key thing was one of the big themes there is a whole deep state issue, and how the hero of the book, the playwright Athanasius, who comes from a scripted background, meaning plays, versus the reality staged by his nemesis, the master of the games in the Colosseum, he uncovers this imperial plot to extend the rule of Rome for 1,000 years. And you see how the state corrupts other institutions, including the church and whatnot. And that's a theme that's playing out today. And to me, that just says that these are age-old themes, and I love exploring them in my novel. I think Americans, in particular, tend to be a little paranoid. And so I get a chance to explore that, whether it's in the modern adventures like Raising Atlantis or historical thrillers and organizations that really do seek to influence the rest of us.
Yeah, I was reading the blurb for another one of your novels, The War Cloud, which seems to be very fitting to the headlines of today, even though you wrote it a few years ago.
Well, that one, that's a very interesting book because I actually wrote that right after I graduated from Northwestern and came out to Hollywood. It was a big spec script, got a lot of notice and variety and whatnot, and it was in the early 90s I wrote the script, which was different, of course, from the novel I wrote later. But the big problem with that as a movie was that the idea that Washington could be attacked by nukes, the studios didn't think that was realistic, and that there would be a female president. They also didn't think that was realistic. And so it was funny because in those days, the definition of an action movie in terms of audience was males 25 and under. And so they just couldn't see a woman being at least 35 or older to be president was going to draw the action crowd. And so the same names kept coming up then. I think it was Sigourney Weaver, number one. I think Mary McDonnell, Gina Davis, Glenn Close. there was somebody else. But the irony is all of those actresses eventually played a president or first lady. That's what was so funny was in time they did. And, what basically happened is there was a rival script and the studios did the math. It's very interesting about our time because you were talking about how relevant it is now. The book is, yes, but the script at the time wasn't considered to be realistic enough. So what happened is they crunched the numbers and they decided, you know what? If we put in a male instead of a female, which was the whole point of my story, and it's Harrison Ford, well, we can make $300 million instead of $100 million back in those days, and that's how Air Force One got made. So there you go. So one of the lessons learned as a novelist, honestly, was that when it came to films, certainly back then, now it's changing, a female lead in an action story probably wasn't going to cut it in terms of box office. But if it's a book, the majority of readers tend to be women, and so you have better luck with a female heroine.
I always hear about Hollywood tinkering with novels and stories and stuff. So fascinating.
Yeah. Nowadays, it's easy to just. I think they did that with Salt. It was originally written for Tom Cruise, and then they said, "Well, let's switch it," and they put in Angelina Jolie.
Wow. Yeah. Now you have House of Cards. Robin Wright is the president now on that one. So it's interesting how things are changing.
Yes, but I still have there's a real place in my heart for what I guess they call in the genre terminology male adventure. I mean, I think that it's very difficult these days to really have a book featuring a male protagonist with a strong female heroine that really takes off. Where you get men who read books. And to me, that's always been a holy grail. I would never I never would want to tune out half the audience.
When you start writing these books and you're like getting all the research and the information down, do you have a detailed outline before you even start writing it, or do you just kind of get the idea and then you start to write the story?
I've done it. It's usually it's both. Some books I feel my way through and end up doing quite a few revisions. Raising Atlantis was like that because I couldn't quite find anything out there that was kind of like it, and I just kind of felt my way through it. It was first novel. And then there are others where, like The War Cloud, which I just kind of knew beginning to end kind of where I wanted to go with it. These days, I definitely think over the general concept more than before, in terms of its appeal and more importantly, like what really, sparks my imagination and then try to expand it sort of snowflake style, mostly to keep me from doing a deep dive into the research like I told you, because I could just take forever. But I have to tell you that the truth is until you can outline it forever, which is what they do in Hollywood here. It's, you go from a 2-page synopsis to a 10-page to a 50-page treatment, and then a script, and which is part of the reason why most of our big budget movies look and sound and feel alike. And, I think that when you're doing genuine research and writing, when the rubber meets the road, a turn of a phrase can actually lead you in a new direction in the story. And I found that the best stuff has come out of the actual writing, and the surprises that happen to me. I don't like surprises. I don't like redoing a lot of the work, but the best stuff I've ever done has come that way. And then you have to be willing to redream the dream and, throw out your darlings. So, I have found that, I will start with the concept and do a brief outline, that the real stuff happens in the writing of it. You almost have to write the first draft to know what the book's going to be about.
Even before you started to write novels, were you a fan of the thriller and adventure genres as a reader?
I was. I remember someone's advice about how if you had a weekend to spend and you were had to read some books, what genre type of story could you easily read a bunch of books in? Versus the one-off book that you've heard you have to read, and it's fantastic, of course, but it may not be your thing. And I found that to be very helpful. Like there are some, you can go on Netflix, for example, and there are a zillion different stories out there, and there's some B movies that are just terribly made. But if it's a genre I really like, and I like the concept, I look past the bad acting, everything else, and I'm like, well, how is this? How did the idea get advanced? How did they do this? And I'm that way with books and certain thrillers. Some I naturally gravitate to. So that was kind of helpful to me. I know when I wrote Raising Atlantis, I was looking in the bookstores. I was thinking, gee, there's nothing here that I really want right now. What would I want to read? And I found that was extremely helpful. You kind of write the book you want to read.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that before too. That's like if you can't find it, write it.
Absolutely.
And so what are you working on now? What projects do you have now on the horizon?
I am working on something, a really big project that I'm told I will be shot if I disclose, but I'm extremely excited about it, and it is a little different. I also, in addition to that, have you'll be the first to know when I can say anything. So I just pledged that to you.
All right, great.
I've also blocked out, several more adventures with Conrad and Serena for several books, and I'll get to those after this other project. So it's a movie and book project. So that's kind of basically what I'm doing, and the research is done, and I am writing it now. So I'm in production.
So where can the readers and listeners find you? You have on your website. I see you on Facebook and Twitter, I would imagine.
Yeah, Facebook and Twitter, and Amazon, of course. And then if they can spell my name, they can find my author website at thomasgreanias.com, Greanias.com. The easier website to go to is probably raisingatlantis.com, and there they have access to. It's a news site too, the latest news and archaeology and discoveries and all that, everything related to the themes of the books, along with the Virgin Mystery free e-shorts that they can get.
Awesome, and I'll have links for that on the website for the listeners. But so they'll check that out to get some cool novels and even some free ebooks, shorts. So I think that's a win-win.
Yep.
Okay, Thomas, I want to thank you very much for your time and for talking to us about your work and your novels. It's been fascinating talking to you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. I'd like to ask you to please review and rate this podcast over on iTunes. It really helps me get the word out. If you take a few seconds of your time to do that, it would be much appreciated. You can also visit my website at thrillingreads.com/podcast for show notes on this episode, as well as information about the podcast in general. And you can also sign up for my mailing list there. You'll be getting special offers from our guests, as well as information, behind the scenes information on the podcast. And please do visit my author website at alanpeterson.com. I appreciate your support. And so until next episode, I will talk to you then.